Our Talks. I'm your host, Daryl Rosenstein, and today we're going to be talking with the leader for global ecommerce for Capgemini, Chris Harrison. We're going to be discussing a lot of topics today around integration, composable commerce, digital journeys, and the issues that retailers and merchants have with making transformations happen with their teams. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Daryl. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
Well, you've been in the e-commerce game for an awful long time now. You've seen a bunch of changes. What do you think's going on today in the world that every retail merchant should be aware of?
Yeah, great question. It has been a while, but I don't like to date myself too much. I think, there's continuing pressure, right, to do more, even as budgets get cut, right? And everybody's trying to determine, how can we go to that next level? One of the things I was talking to my team about is if you look globally at the percent of transactions that are done digitally in the world, it's 14%. So there's still tons of headroom out there. Now, probably we're ahead in B2C of where we are in B2B, and the number would be higher in B2C, but I still think there's tons of headroom in that space to really make a lot of progress and also really improve experiences. I mean, we've all been on bad sites, right? We've all had that.
Unfortunately.
We've gone to the site. Yeah. And you go and you go, why can't you be better? Right. And you really can have a better experience. It's not without a reach for a lot of companies. And as technology options continue to improve and increase, that also gives you avenues to do things, with less investment and at faster rates. So I think it's a really exciting time in the domain.
Well, I just came back from Shop Talk in Vegas and listened to some amazing presentations from the commerce leaders at NBC Universal, Ulta Beauty, Chico's, Varel, and they were featuring a lot of their digital journey that they've taken as a company in terms of moving from some of the legacy platforms that are on the market, Hybris, ATG, into composable commerce. And it was exciting stuff, talking about how it's speeded up their innovation cycle, speeded up their ability to listen to their customers. And, the decision to make that change is not an easy one. And they were replete with examples of what not to do. That is, jump in whole hog without really evaluating what your end state should be, what your goals were. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, Capgemini's approach to, these innovative offerings and how to fix or how to advise a risk averse, process driven culture where in some cases, tens of millions of dollars have been spent on a legacy solution.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I love attending those conferences and hearing those stories. And so one of the things I always share with executives when I talk to them about their journey in commerce and the opportunity to hear some of the success stories, despite what they may say in the opening keynote at some of these software conferences, rarely ever does a CMO or someone in charge of this journey get up and said, well, it all went really well because we picked the right software, right? So they all talk about all the elements other than the software dimension that were more challenging and surprising to them, right? The cultural change, the people change, the process change. And so those are also important elements in addition to the technology. And we get a lot of people who come to us for technology advice and technology assistance. And, we always expand the conversation to talk about what's gone well with other technology implementations at your company? Where have other technology programs had challenges? And let's make sure we address those, right? Let's recognize them right up front and talk about how we do those. Because if you've struggled with implementations in other technology spaces, it's likely those same cultural and people challenges are going to crop up in this technology implementation.
Well, does Capgemini actually have a business process offering and capability to make those customers more agile? And do you recommend SAFe, for instance?
Yeah, two really good questions. Yes, we do, and we do it in a couple different parts of our business, depending on the industry and the type of change that's required. And I won't do the whole service offering pitch here, but certainly can talk about that and any follow-ups anybody's interested in about how we offer that either out of Invent or digital customer experience or our Sageti organization, again, depending on the industry and the type of change that's needed. We're big advocates of Agile and Scaled Agile framework. The scale of customers that we work with make Scaled Agile framework a really good fit for many customers. We're using that as our standard technology methodology, standard implementation methodology for commerce projects and MarTech projects now. Big advocate. I've really come to appreciate the level of definition that Scaled Agile framework adds for large enterprises, because we all heard those stories about companies that, well, Agile didn't work here, right? We can't do Agile. Agile didn't work here. And what they're missing is some of the structure around it that's up from the daily Scrum, right? People can do daily Scrums, and you can put things in Jira and have tickets and pull tickets, and have a board, right? But what Scaled Agile does really well is the things above that, right? The value streams and the lean business case and those elements of SAFe are probably more important than what you're doing down at the development team level.
Well, when you are engaging a client that's going to take a journey and adopt, let's say, for example, full stack composable commerce, they've made that determination. They've got a legacy platform held together with bubble gum and duct tape in the back. That there's people that have been fossilized that built it, and you need to, as that partner, really analyze the readiness of the people, their technology, and their processes to make that adoption and make a recommendation of what are they ready to do first. How do you do that?
Well, again, it's a matter of being honest about what other things have gone well and other challenges you've faced in your organization, right? Companies say, we want to implement, MACH because it gives us the ability to swap in and out technology, right? And I look and I'm like, well, you're on Siebel, right? And so, clearly, I've looked at your ecosystem and you got a lot of old technology in. So I don't think it's the tech that's keeping you from swapping in things in and out, right? No bones against Siebel. I just do that as kind of a time capsule reference, right?
Sure.
And if you're not good at swapping in and out technology as an organization, then maybe putting in architecture that allows you to do that, is going to have the same challenge. I think when you and I spoke once, and I told you the story from 20 years ago when I worked with a large company that spent $150 million on an implementation of new technology. And I was a developer at the time and very excited about, working on this new technology. And, the goal was to be more agile and more responsive. I don't even think we called it agile back then, but we implemented this technology, and then the organization and the culture rolled out the same change request process they had with the old technology. And the whole thing went into the same process where the business couldn't make changes anymore. So, it's really important to say, what are the successes and what are the challenges we've had in the past, and recognize those and seek to mitigate those going forward.
Well, whose responsibility is it anyway to, help that executive team, come up to speed in a smooth and natural way to adopt the technology? And is it the vendor that's recommending these solutions, or is it the partner that's going to be managing the go live, the implementation, the enablement of that utilization?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all three of the customer, and importantly, it's the business portion of the business users and the customer. If the business is not willing to participate in agile methodology, agile's not going to be successful, right? It's not purely a development methodology. You can use it at that level, but you won't get the benefits, right? So it's a combination of the business, the technology staff at the customer, the vendor, and the integrator. And an integrator like us can offer training in Scaled Agile framework and Scaled Agile framework coaching, and because it's our standard methodology, we can help guide in the day-to-day process of okay, this is how scaled agile framework applies in this circumstance, right? And so I think it's a combination of all.
Well, I in listening to again some of the stories and talking to some of the merchants that I interacted with at the show and then beforehand, you've got essentially an IT organization that's headed up by essentially a developer of the ERP system of record, either Oracle or SAP, to throw a couple names out there, and they're used to a very where the software is dictating every process that they engage in, and when they move to MACH, they're going to be far more agile in terms of they're going to have individual teams, small teams, 3-4 people tops, managing a particular microservice, and they're going to be managing that independently. So it's a far more diverse team that's, I would argue, has a higher skill set, has a higher business skill set, managing that user experience. And what do you see the biggest challenge there for that organization, that to go from that centralized decision making to that delegation methodology?
Yeah. Yeah, it is obviously a cultural change and an organizational change. I think one of the things that I found to be really successful in that is the value streams that are in Scaled Agile Framework. If
Mhm.
people are focused on the same value delivery, right? We're going to now increase, this particular capability, which we expect to drive this result for our business. And as long as that's clear and the outcome, and we'll talk a little bit about how you make that outcome clear, you can get people to rally around that, right? When it's just, some line item in the backlog because, it's been in the backlog for 9 months and gosh, we've been trying to do this and never done it. Let's get it done, right? Just being in the backlog in and of itself is not valuable, right? If there's not a clear consensus around the value to the business and the value to the organization, it's hard to get people to rally around that. And that's why, again, I'm a huge fan of Scaled Agile Framework and value streams, because you get people focused on what this means.
Well, I think that Agile certainly has become, for the development community in the software world, the standard. And
Right.
the fact that we have the technologists that are running the client organizations not totally on board yet is certainly a challenge that you're best suited to address as a partner. Um, but how is Capgemini helping the software vendors focus on the positive business outcomes of adopting MACH solutions?
Yeah, so at Capgemini, we're really increasing our focus and our commitment to business outcomes, and we do that in a number of ways. I mean, it can start early on in the conversations with the vendor about, well, what's the business case? I just got off the phone with a partner of ours right before this, talking about, yeah, this is really interesting and cool technology, and let's talk about the business case. And when you hear crickets on the other end, then you've got, okay, we're off to a bad start, right? Let's go back and talk about the business case,
What's the
right?
why? What's the why? Why would they do
Exactly.
this?
Right. And if the why is a bunch of technical features, okay, that's an interesting conversation, but it's ultimately not where we want to be, right? So it starts from that very beginning of being focused on the business case. Are we doing a cost reduction to improve margins? Are we trying to, reduce inventory to free up capital to fund other initiatives? Are we just trying to increase sales? Are we trying to improve profit margins on orders? And get focused on those outcomes as early as possible. Because again, if you can get agreement on that, then that flows into everything else, right? It flows into the value streams, it flows into the backlog. And then, that can also flow into, well, how are we going to measure that? Right. So we have these lofty objectives, right? My favorite is world-class customer experience. Great. How will we measure that we have a world-class customer experience, right? Let's
Emojis.
describe that.
It's emojis. It's how many smiling emojis you get.
And that could be the metric. If you're implementing social commerce, right, and you're trying to have, an increase in that channel, that could be your measure, right? There's all kinds of great metrics in social commerce to measure those things. But it's shocking how often we skip that step of how are we going to measure the success here of the business value.
Well, I mean, when you talk about business value, there's certainly companies that realize that they are far behind their competitors in terms of being able to innovate, provide a better customer experience, utilize the data, leverage the data that they have, collect data in a more efficient manner, and so on and so forth. And in some cases, it very well may be you end up coming to the conclusion that they should be going with a fully composable mock stack. Now, how do you recommend pursuing that all at once, or using the strangler fig methodology where you're essentially picking off targets of opportunity where you've got a very poorly performing functionality that would be dramatically upgraded with a new API-led cloud-native solution that essentially is bulletproof from a scalability perspective?
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you brought up the strangler fig analogy. I think that's a great one. And if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend your audience go look that one up. And then I would also
We'll have a
recommend,
link.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'd also recommend maybe not using that terminology beyond the development team, right? There's a little more approachable, terminology. I mean, it really what it boils down to is a phased implementation, right? One of the great things about mock and being able to pick and choose your pieces is also being able to pick and choose when you implement those pieces, right? You don't have to do an all-in-one implementation where you change everything. We're working with customers who are doing billions of dollars of transactions online, right? Changing your entire solution at that point is a huge risk, right? And there's ways to mitigate it and approach that, but the mock architecture and the mock principles really allow you to reduce your risk and focus on the most valuable pieces first, right? If it's improving the experience across different types of channels, or if it's improving the experience across different platforms, whether it's mobile or other channels that you want to start targeting, you can work on just that front end technology, right? If it's about improving the speed to deliver, checkout and actually order status and all those things in the experience and how they drive sales, you can focus on the commerce piece, right? If it's search, you can focus on just search, right? And so what we generally do is work with the customer to determine that business case, where the value is foremost, and then build a roadmap towards that end.
When it comes down to selection, what is it that you do at Capgemini to make a determination when it's a given solution capability for one vendor versus another?
Yeah, great question. It depends on the level of investment and the business case behind it, right? I don't like to do, as I think I've been pretty clear, I don't like to do software selection before we have a business case, right? That's a problem typically. It leads to bigger problems down the road. So once you've established the business case, then that gives you a framework and criteria um, by which to make that selection process. And I'm a big fan of let's do an MVP and let's do an initial phase, which is less expensive. And then let's try and see how quickly we can get to the point where this is self funding, right? And so, which technology, as I said in that earlier example, which technology is going to have the biggest bang for the buck early on? And see if we can make the business case self funding rather than do a big bang on the entire business case. And so when you do it that way and you start looking at vendor selection, then there's a couple different ways to do it. There's actually a spectrum, and it depends on the level of investment and your audience in terms of what you're going to need. I've done everything from I can give you a short list based on years and years of experience of here are the two I would look at and get demos, and then we can go from there. Or I've done the full blown presentation for the board, right, where we've got lots of PowerPoint and lots of Harvey balls and all those good deep analytical due diligence that makes everybody comfortable with that selection. But I'll tell you, Daryl, I'm still going to go back to this hearing these success stories at conferences and talking about how no one's ever gotten up and said, well, we picked the right software, right? It's all the other things we can make. We talked to somebody yesterday and they were looking at 3 different commerce platforms in mock, and it was like I can make any one of those meet your needs, right? So let's talk about the other criteria that go around that, and how you want to manage your vendor ecosystem, so we make sure that we fit in that way.
So it comes down to the business case. I mean, it comes down to
Absolutely.
which vendors really have the proof in the pudding and have the clients that are
Exactly.
willing to stand up and say, "Hey, we adopted the solution, and here was our path, and here were the issues that we encountered along the way, and here's the experience we're having now." And essentially, companies that don't have those business cases, it's a tough road to hoe as far as getting a
Right.
recommendation. Well, obviously,
Right.
there's risk involved in making any technology change, but how does Capgemini help customers mitigate the risk of going with composable architecture?
Yeah, so there's a number of mechanisms and approaches to risk mitigation. Everything from the regular meetings with the sponsors, steering committees, making sure that they're aware of and eliminating roadblocks. Actually, we could have a whole separate discussion on how you work with steering committees, right, and how you make that effective. But part of it is that focus on the business case, right, and then understanding that there are going to be discoveries, right? I've said this a couple times. I've never had anybody come and say, "Let's do exactly what you did for that other company." Right? We're going to do something unique in this space every time to some degree, right? And we want to lessen the amount that it's unique, but every time there's some level that's unique. It's either some combination in mock that hasn't been done before, or it's technologies that maybe the client team's not familiar with. There may be things like React or Node.js that they're not familiar with that they need to get training on. Integrations are always unique, and they're always a big challenge, right? So understanding what the big rocks are that you're going to run into, and then developing an approach to go after those early, can really help mitigate risk. And then I'm also a fan of some of the things in Agile, like a spike, right? You talk about the back end, some of these old fossilized, systems that are in place, right? I'm a big fan of doing a spike with those systems, right? Because not only am I going to find the technical issues, like, oh, by the way, that data center can't connect to the other data center, right? And nobody knew that, and until we tried to connect those two via actual code. But it also brings out some of those cultural differences, right? Where one team's moving in an agile fashion, they're doing sprints, they're doing frequent releases, and the other team says, nope, we only change software with months, in a month that has an R in it on the third Thursday, right? And driving a spike through the entire stack and driving it through the entire process really helps uncover that in what I call kind of an archaeological way, right? There's a lot of archaeology in what we do, and when when you actually drive a spike through the entire stack and the entire process, it tends to bring up a lot of surprises.
Well, with composable, you're dealing with a mission critical architecture that is comprised of multiple vendors, sometimes 8 to 10. How does CAP mitigate, or how does CAP integrate all of these?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways. One is, having the roadmap so that you know when things come together and which things come in what sequence. There's no substitute for good old project management, right? Agile is not immune from project management. It's a different kind of project management, but it's still project management. That's another one. And then, having a vendor program where, people are bought into the overall objectives, right? And you get them on board, and you're transparent about what you're trying to accomplish, and you get their buy-in about what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a number of different dimensions you go after that risk mitigation and reduce those challenges.
Well, as far as the integration is concerned, who pays for that? In terms of the integrating the technologies themselves, the connectors, the APIs, who is actually on the hook for that cost?
It depends. It depends on the combination of technologies. In some cases, some of the solutions actually have integrations built in or connectors built in, and that can be relatively easy to do. In some other cases where there's custom integration, it can be harder. Certainly middleware tools have come a long way in the last decade or so, and those can be helpful, and you can use those to address those problems. But they're typically going to be one of the biggest costs, and it's typically going to be borne by the client. There's not a magic bullet to integrations in this space, at least not yet. I mean, I think it's getting there. Some of my colleagues are on the board of MACH, and I'm encouraged to hear the cooperation of building connectors and adapters. But we're still a ways off from this just all magically working together. One of my favorite examples is we built a commerce solution, actually at a previous role I had, where we integrated with multiple ERP systems. And it wasn't until we got to the actual system integration test, and when we discovered that if I sent an order to this one ERP system, it had to have line item numbers beginning with 1. But if I sent an order to this other system, it had to have a line item number starting at 0, right? One was 0 based and one was 1 based. And so we had to write code in the middle of system integration tests to make that change. And sometimes there's no way to find that out, but to build that integration and test it.
Well, I think one of the biggest advantages, obviously, of the mock solutions is that they all feature API-led development. So the
Yes.
connectors themselves are very straightforward in terms of their development cycle, and far less expensive, far less involvement. And in fact, I'm certainly aware of vendors going to market with pre-integrated solutions. I think of Elastic Path going to market with Bloomreach for search, or Algolia for search, or for Bloomreach for content, and so on and so forth, where they've already built and maintained that connector
Yeah.
network. So
Yeah.
that's they're paying for part of that, but
Right.
obviously, Cap's going to have a role in there somewhere.
Yeah,
Now,
like I said, I think it has a lot of promise, and I think it's going to get a lot better. I typically see that integrations are 40% of an implementation on a commerce or a MarTech implementation. I think that number is going to come down, but I still think it's going to be significant. I'm hopeful, though.
I the examples that I heard from the speakers at Shop Talk certainly seem to say that, yeah, it was a lot less expensive to do the integration, but that is the big cost. Well, how does CAP support the actual production execution of the architecture?
You mean once it's live?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, great. So typically there's a transition to a support team, right? And the key is to make sure that that support team has the right skills. And I think it's something to be aware of, that sometimes having that mix of skills with all these different platforms and technologies can actually be a little more expensive than having the all-in-one platform that you talk about, which is based on one tech stack, right? Because you ultimately need people who can debug and solve problems when problems occur in production. And we can allocate the right level of expertise, and the right amount of expertise, but you're still going to want people. You're going to need somebody who knows Node.js, and you're going to need somebody who knows J2EE on certain things. You're going to need to know somebody who knows JavaScript on something, or gosh forbid, PHP in some cases, right? And those have to be available when you've got an issue, because these are customer facing and revenue generating.
One of the things that I've heard from the users that have gone, the merchants that have gone to fully composable architecture, is that there's one person that most of them don't have, and they don't have an architect anymore. They don't need an architect because the solutions themselves integrate in a fashion that don't require architecture, that's managing incredibly complex mappings through an existing infrastructure. But, you know, again, we're talking about, in those cases, they've got 8 to 10 different solutions that are integrated into that commerce platform. If the customer has an issue with it, who do they call? Who are you
Right.
going to call?
You're going to call an architect. It's a different architect than you're used to, right? On an all-in-one solution, right? You'd have somebody who is potentially very deep in one technology that spanned a lot of the different modules in that solution, right? Think back to your ERP example, right? You have to have somebody who knows that ERP and that tech stack deeply, even if it's antiquated. In this, you're going to have somebody who's more of a conductor, right? And can look across different technologies and quickly get to the root cause of the problem, right? Because what you don't want when you've got one of these implementations, which is, fully mock, is a bunch of this, right? Where, this team says, no, it's their fault. And that team says, no, it's their fault. Again, there's a bit of a cultural thing about getting people aligned and incented on objectives. But at the same time, you're also going to need, this newer architecture skill where somebody can sort that out quickly and go, actually, the problem's right here. And here's who I need to fix it.
Now, is Capgemini going to be that contact point, that single point of
Yeah.
contact?
Yeah, so what we're doing in Mock is we're investing in training architects, not just in the tools, but in how to bring that overall solution to bear and then how to support it, right? That's like I said, that's a new type of architect that we haven't previously seen in the market. And you can't just go out and hire necessarily. So, there's a lot of investment on our part in training and a lot of collaboration, right? We're frequently having internal calls where people are sharing what they've done in mock and the challenges they've faced and how they've solved them, so that we're not trying to solve that problem multiple times at multiple places. We're solving it one place and then sharing that experience across the company.
Now, to switch gears for a second here, in terms of, obviously you're making recommendations for solutions, but in the end, it's the vendors themselves that need to make the pitch. They need to reach those key decision makers. How does Capgemini partner with those vendors in terms of getting them in front of the right folks within the organization that they need to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a priority, because if we go back to what we talked about earlier, which is it really takes three parties to be successful. It takes the client, it takes the solution vendor, and it takes the SI. You have to engage them early, right? You've got to build that level of understanding and trust early. So I'm very happy to get them engaged. I generally won't do demos, right? I always want to bring my partner in to do the demo, right? I'm pretty much dead set against doing demos, and I've had to have this customer conversation where, like, we don't want to talk to vendors. I don't want the software people beating down my door, calling me every day, right? I'm like, look, they're best suited to do this. We need to build this relationship now, and we can structure the agenda in such a way that it's efficient and not disruptive. But they should be coming in to do this. In fact, we've got one later this month. Well, it's not April yet, but in end of April, where we're going to be going to New Jersey to talk to a client, arm in arm with one of the mock commerce solutions, to demo and to pitch. And it wasn't the client's request to have the vendor come along, but we're gonna require it.
How about that? So, what does co-marketing look like with Cap?
Well, there's a number of ways we do that. So we've got offers and marketing that we're doing on mock and composable, and one of ours called crafted commerce. And then there are various ways we support our vendor partners in that initiative. So we meet regularly with them to make sure we're aligned on our objectives and determine which industry solutions we want to tailor to meet those needs. How we go to market in those industries. And it's also a matter of prioritization, right? We're not necessarily going to pitch every vendor to every industry, right? Some are a better fit in certain industries than others, right? And some are just not a fit in certain industries. And I know the vendors listening may not like to hear that, but it's a more effective use of your time as well as ours when we determine that criteria and prioritize.
Yeah, I think the day of the Swiss Army knife solution vendor is gone. There's
Yeah, exactly.
I've got something that'll do that. It's like I think the consumers have gotten wise to that. But
Exactly.
another issue that we was spoken of a great deal at Shop Talk was the brands themselves. Essentially not expressing frustration with the marketplaces, but when you look at the major marketplace vendors like AWS and Walmart, they definitely do not do justice to a brand to a brand's image. They don't build that brand's image. They don't really, that's not what they're there to do. They're there to show the product alongside everything else that's out there. So manufacturers have, come to the conclusion they've got to go direct to consumer, at least in terms of their messaging, tell a story to weave a compelling narrative around that, why they have certain products and what that product is. So it's more compelling. What have you seen them do right? Uh, and what have they gotten wrong in their rush to go direct to the consumer?
Well, so I would I would come back and address the first part of that statement, because I hear that complaint a lot, right? We're not getting our brand represented on these marketplaces the way we want it represented. Um, and you see there are clearly brands out there that are doing that, right? So it's not impossible, right? It may not be the marketplace's primary objective, but marketplaces do better when brands do better. So you actually have a shared objective. And we actually have people who specialize in how do you best work with the marketplaces so that your brand is represented well. So I don't think it's impossible, but I certainly also understand the desire to have direct to consumer messaging and connections. The world's changed a lot in this space. And the question is, what what will your customer gain in that experience, right? Just because you build something doesn't mean people are going to come, right? What will your customer actually gain out of this experience, right? I mean, we've all seen this statistic now that product searches are now initiated on Amazon more often than they are on Google, right? So your customers are already drawn to those marketplaces because of assortment and because of the delivery experience, right? So what is it you're going to give them in your direct to consumer experience that makes them come and find you over their first instinct, which is just go to Amazon, right? And it's not your typical brand promise, right? You may have the most wonderful product in the world, right? But if they can get it on Amazon, they're probably going to go there first, right? But are you giving them some solution to their needs in your experience that they can't get on Amazon, right? Are you problem solving for them? Are you helping them in some way beyond just your product promise?
Well, we've been talking about a lot of different solutions, and a lot of my listeners are the founders of e-commerce solutions and martech solutions of all sizes and stripes. A lot of startups out there, and they I'm sure want to know at what point does it make sense for them as a vendor to engage with Capgemini in their development cycle.
Yeah, it's a great question. We typically work with large scale companies. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. We definitely work with some smaller companies and some startup companies in our client base. And there's some really interesting ones out there now that we're working with, and I can't describe some of the startup work we're doing now. But again, it's got to be in a way that delivers value, right? So, and I know that sounds like a consulting platitude. So we'll come back and explain a little bit about what that means, right? So if you're in the market and you're looking at the enterprise CL customers of a certain size, then it's a matter of, who do we already have, and which industries do we already have established in terms of that criteria I mentioned earlier, right? Where should we focus, right? I'm not a fan of just, giving you an account list, right? So that you can then add a bunch of stuff into your, sales system and say that you're going to go pursue these now. It's not an effective use of either our times. So, where are you an industry fit? Where do you have a need where you need the independent credibility for somebody on a business case, right? You may be selling a solution in somewhere, and having partnership with Capgemini helps give lends credence to the business case, right? Or maybe there isn't a business case and the client needs help building one. Certainly done that on a number of occasions. And in the startup realm, it's a matter of, how does this then project into the future for this enterprise and for you and for Capgemini, right? You might have the greatest basket weaving startup company ever, right? But I'm not sure that's going to project into a big future market for them or for us.
Well, API-led basket weaving AI is certainly a major discussion point amongst the VC community, and I'm very anxious for what they come up with because there's some great creative minds behind it. But more to the point, though.
Yeah, apologies now. Please don't bash me on the public on basket weaving. It's nothing personal against basket weaving.
We're going to have to turn on comments on once we post this live. It's going to be awful,
Right.
but I'll probably get letters. What are there's hundreds of agencies in the e-commerce marketplace, and some they all have different offerings. Some are more creative, some are more commerce platforms, some are more data. What are the advantages of partnering with Capgemini as a vendor?
Great question. It's to have that broad view of the market of solutions and help you find the ones that fit your business case and deliver that value, right? As well as having a partner who can help you end to end, right? Not every partner can do that. And some of the horror stories we're hearing from people attempting to do mock early on is, we picked this partner for this technology, this partner for this technology, this partner for this technology, and they were all great in their little space, but they couldn't work together, right? There are too many conversations where I got this, right, or that, right? So, it's having a partner who can work across different technologies and different parts of your organization, right? I don't need to be the implementer for every technology, but we need to have a cohesive view. Again, the things we've talked about earlier in this discussion around what's the cultural change, what's the business case, right? What do we need to do for the people in the organization to make this successful?
Well, we've covered an awful lot of ground here, and you've been very generous with your time. But do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I think I just want to reiterate how excited I am about it. It's really a great time where this technology can open possibilities. If I think about where we were, 10 or even 5 or 6 years ago in terms of trying to bring new capabilities to light and deliver value to business with commerce technology, there are so many more approachable ways to do it now with MACH. It really allows customers to take a phased approach to how you deliver that value, and really opens up the opportunity to make it more self-funding more quickly, which I'm very excited about.
Well, it's always about value in the end. So,
Absolutely.
well, again, Chris, thank you so much. I wish you tons of success there, helping make merchants more successful online. And we'll be speaking to you.
Thanks, Daryl. Enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to talking again.
Thanks for listening to Mar Talks. Please leave a review and a rating on your platform of choice. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcast platforms. To find out more about how the Rosenstein Group can help you find the right leaders for your client development teams in MarTech and e-commerce, please visit our website, rosensteingroup.com.